David Stevenson. Hello, everybody. I'm David Stevenson. Tonight, I'm moderating an event called Alaskans with New Books. This is a Alaska Book Week event for 2022. We'd like to thank Trish Jenkins and Lila Voigt of Alaska Center for the Book for being our technicians behind the scenes and helping us put this event together. Tonight we have four writers with new books. We have Emily Wall with Breaking into Air, Birth Poems. We have Sharon Emmerichs with Shield Maiden, a novel. We have Kerry Dean Feldman with Alice's Trading Post, a novel of the West. And we have Ray Ball with Trinities, a book of poems. So our format tonight is we're gonna have a little kind of interview with questions that were devised by the internet site LitHub that they always ask new writers as a way of talking about their work. And they're kind of quirky questions and a little bit, off the wall in a way. So we'll start by, the first question is, we'll start alphabetically, but I'll stray from that shortly. Sorry, Ray. Without summarizing your book in any way, what would you say your book is about?
My book is about family history and family history.
So you didn't have any trouble answering that question?
No, not that one. Not that one. It's also about weird medicine.
Family history and weird medicine. That's great. Sharon, without summarizing in any way, what's it about?
Early medieval life and culture, Beowulf, raising marginalized voices, unlikely heroes, and true love.
Oh, that's a handful.
It was a handful to write.
Great. We look forward to seeing it. Kerry, Alice's Trading Post, without summarizing, what's it about?
Well, I actually asked a former student of mine to tell me what she thought it was about. It's about a young woman of mixed descent in the 19th century, learning how to become a woman during a time of violence and cultural unrest in the West, where I grew up.
Great. Thank you. And Emily, without summarizing, tell us.
This book of poems is actually a collection of birth stories. I spent 5 years gathering birth stories. So it's about the power of women's bodies in that beautiful, sometimes terrible moment when we enter the world. Wow,
amazing. I love the cover of your book, by the way. It's really gorgeous. Oh, yeah. There it is.
It is. My friend Elise Tomlinson did this painting. I'm trying to tell everybody about her. She's amazing.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Okay, question number 2. Without explaining why and without naming other authors or books, can you discuss various influences on your book? We'll start with Kerry. Uh-oh, we might have lost him. Better start with Sharon.
Influences. Well, first off, my lifelong love of lyrical fantasy. Been reading it since I was a child, especially anything with dragons in it, of course, which is why I love Beowulf as well. Definitely fairy tales, folk tales, and within the past 10 years, the novelizations of creative retellings of those folk tales and fairy tales. Those really pushed me towards how I was going to write this book.
Terrific. Emily, same question.
I would say mothers on the preschool playground. So I noticed as I was having my children that women were sharing birth stories, but they were whispering them very quietly to each other. And I finally wondered, why are we whispering? These are art. These stories are incredible. And I realized we're whispering them because these stories have been treated as shameful or not something we're supposed to talk about, or mommy stories, put in all these sort of boxes that were silencing us. And so I think the bravery of these women, especially when I went to them and said, can I have your story to publish it? And they said, yes, they were my biggest influence.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. And Kerry, influence.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, it took me 30 years to write this novel about this woman growing up in the West. And I would say it's growing up there myself. It was a big influence. I wanted to know about the area where I grew up back in the 19th century, but also playing sports against Native American boys when I was in high school and getting to know them as persons was an influence. But also because it's about a woman, I have interviewed scores of Alaska Native women for my applied anthropology work, and I've known their stories. I dedicate my story to Native American mothers, daughters, and grandmothers, because I'm trying to undo some Western myths here. And also, when I was a kid, 5 years old in Terry, Montana, my dad owned the Rialto movie theater, and I went to every cowboy movie there was. And so those are all my influences. I think there's 4 of them, as I thought about. There wasn't just one. So it's a good question.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so this is if you could choose a career besides writing and professing, since everyone in the room here is a classroom teacher, irrespective of schooling, requirements and talent, like these don't have to be things you almost did or could have done. If you had your choice of anything, what would you do if you had to do it over? Let's start with Emily this time.
I think I would be a pastor, actually. I grew up in a super right-wing, misogynistic church household. And it wasn't until I was 48 that I saw my first female pastor, and I cried all the way through the service and thought, oh my God, what if I had a church to like read Psalms and counsel people and explore spirituality? And it just like opened up for me this whole idea of the power of a woman standing in front of a church. So I think I would do that.
What a fabulous answer. Thank you. Ray, how about you?
I think it depends a little bit on the day. I think in my more extroverted moods, I would say opera singer. And then in my more introverted moods, I think I would say veterinarian. I grew up in a household where my father was a herpetologist, and we had about 500 various animals living with us, reptiles, amphibians of all sorts, tortoises, lizards, snakes. So I don't really have any fear of those kinds of animals. And then I also love cats and dogs and horses and pigs. And yeah, I think I'd be a really good veterinarian had I not fallen into the spell of history.
Cool answer. Kerry, you're next.
Well, it's hard to imagine any other career because anthropology defines me. And I became interested in anthropology when I was hitchhiking through Europe when I was 24, and didn't have much money. I would have some bread and an orange at lunch and on a park bench, and these old French ladies would sit next to me. Now they don't seem so old, and we would converse in French about their lives, and I became interested in people. But before that, in high school, I thought I'll go through college playing Dixieland on my clarinet. I'll go to New Orleans and I'll be a musician. I just love Pete Fountain and music. The other possibility was playing shortstop for the New York Yankees.
I think a lot of men have given that answer historically through the last few decades. It's a good one, though. Thank you. And Sharon.
Like Ray, I kind of have 2 choices depending on what day it is and how social I'm feeling. When I actually first left home and went to college, I started out as an actor. In fact, I started out as an actor when I was 7 years old, been on the stage my whole life. I desperately wanted to be a performer. I wanted to be a Shakespearean actor. I actually went to NYU Tisch School of the Arts in their theater program, and decided eventually that doing the Shakespeare thing, I was much better on this side, the professing side of the stage. But if I had to choose another profession, I might consider going back to that. But the other thing that has been in my brain for some years now is, it would be really cool to like get an MLS degree and become a specials collection archivist librarian, because I love playing with old manuscripts. I love doing archival research. And I think that being a person who tenders to those and takes care of them and catalogs them and lives and breathes in the library would be a really cool career.
I totally agree. That would be a cool career.
Wouldn't that be a cool career?
It would. For a long
Y'all
time.
need to stop playing in my archives, you people. I tease, I kid.
Well, I had 2 archive trips this past summer, and I just didn't want to come back. I just wanted to stay there. So
that's great. All right. Now, craft elements. What craft elements are your strong suit, and what would you like to get better at? Let's start with Kerry.
That's a good question. I mean, this writer thing is. Can you see me? Yeah. I've written ever since I was 7 years old and want to be a writer, but I didn't have anything to write about. So I thought I'd live life and then see what turned up that was interesting. My strong element, I think, is plot and story. I started out as a short story writer, and I can come up with conflicts pretty easily. And I worked with this lady in California for 5 years. Instead of getting MFA, I worked with a woman, Tony LaPopolo, who works with writers. And for 5 years, we worked on my novel, sentence by sentence. And line by line, she said, "Kerry, you've got a great story, but you don't know how to write a novel." And she was right. And how to tie it all together. You have vignettes, you have this happen, that happened. There has to be themes that readers can follow through. And so I would like to be better at that.
Nice, good answer. Emily, strengths and desires.
Yeah, I like this question. I think my strength maybe is finding the form to fit the poem. I've been really experimenting with form. Some of the stuff I've been writing lately is epistolic, ekphrastic, full-on form poems, and just really trying to find the shape of a particular story. And I really like that with this book. One of the poems is co-written with a friend of mine, Quine, and we studied Tlingit oral tradition to find the form of that poem. So I really like kind of finding its casing weakness or things to work on. I really am sort of getting interested in writing fiction. I wrote a novel just for fun because I teach fiction and I thought maybe I should try this. And I would love to just get really good at plotting. That's really foreign to me as a poet, and sort of figuring out how to plot a whole novel. And I've taken sort of some classes and I'm learning a lot, and it's really fun, and I hope I get better at it.
Hey, David.
Yes.
This is Kerry. I had a question. The only one here of us 4 who has an MFA, I believe, is Emily. Is that right, Emily?
I have an MFA.
I have an
No,
MFA.
Besides David.
No, I do not have an MFA. I only have the lesser degree of a PhD. But Sharon and Ray are graduates of our program.
Oh, they are both.
Yes, they are.
Wow.
all three of our, yeah.
So, but yeah, so I feel kind of naked not having this MFA, but everyone there does. So I'm the odd guy out here. I don't have the MFA. I have the PhD, but it's in anthropology.
Well,
and I was going to ask people, do you feel kind of naked that you don't know, like she used these words to a non-poet, a phrastic. I mean, what is that? You know, so you guys know all this stuff. And I do feel a little inadequate, but I was just going to ask that's all. You're all MFAs. No, David isn't.
I'm not. In fact, it's funny. Daryl Farmer, who teaches up at UAF and directs their MFA program, and he's a fiction writer and a nonfiction writer. He and I were just talking over the summer of, wouldn't it be nice to get an MFA in poetry? You know, like and because that's, you know, that's something I've never studied formally, and if I had to say a weakness or something I'd like to get better at, you can never be more adept at using language. You could never be adept enough, right? You can always be more lyrical, more you know. We've in every institution I've been in, poets were always like next to divinity, and everyone else was lesser. So that's the world I've lived in. All right, so we got, no, Ray, we haven't had the craft question with you, have we?
Or
Sharon.
Or with Sharon.
Okay, yeah, we're right in the middle here. Go ahead, Ray.
Whichever, okay, yeah, sure. So like Emily, I think I'm really pretty good at form. I use a lot of forms in my book that's coming out soon. Huzzles, pantoums, I have a sonnet sequence in there. I think if I wanted to get better at something in terms of literary craft, it would definitely be dialogue. Even when I write fiction, and I don't tend to do it in my historical work because I'm an early modernist. And so I think that's too close to fiction when trying to create sort of dialogue type of scenarios. But I think because I just don't have any real experience with it, I'm terrified of trying to write dialogue. I'm just like deer in the headlights when it comes to it. And so that's one aspect of my craft that definitely is not in my toolkit at all.
Nice. Great, thank you. Sharon.
Things I'm pretty good at. Plotting. I come up with good stories. And actually dialogue was one of my strengths that I had on my list. I've been complimented on my natural sounding dialogue a lot. I'm pretty good with, I love like really lush descriptions of things. But so I give a lot of description in my novels, a lot of figurative language, imagery, things like that. I think I'm pretty good at evoking images in the reader's mind. But things that I know I need to work on, and the Daryl Farmer, who you just mentioned earlier, David, was my third-year mentor in the MFA program. And invariably, one of the things that he wrote on my drafts was, you have a little problem with staging here. And so I have worked extremely hard on improving, but I think I still need to work on improving things like staging and pacing, and as was said earlier, kind of, you know, bringing everything together into a cohesive whole. I have to go through many, many drafts before I can achieve that. And I would like to be able to do that more easily.
Nice. I could kind of join in on this answer a little bit because I'm having a particular problem now. I'm having a collection of short stories coming out soon. And as it turns out, I hate the titles of every single one of them. I didn't realize that as I was writing them one at a time. And I can't decide on a title for the book. None of the titles of the short stories are really doing it for me. And so I guess like titles would be something I'd really, I don't know, how do you become better at that? I just don't know, but I'm super conscious of it now.
David,
Yes.
Do you have any friends who have read your stories?
Some. Yeah, some. Well, in this, there's 8 stories in this book. They're about 25. They're oddly uniform in length, about 25 pages each, which was not, that's just how they came out. Half of them, I guess, were published over the years, and maybe 4 of them are new. So they've had readers.
And I had that problem when with Circa Press. I had short stories, the first thing that they suggested I publish. And I was going to use one of my titles, which I thought was great, but they didn't like it.
Right.
So my wife came up with one based on a Baudelaire poem that I had referenced. But ask people. I mean, it's, you know, throw some ideas out. Maybe look at the end of the story for a line or something like that.
Yeah, good idea. I've been doing, I wanted my editor just to name it, but he doesn't seem to.
The other thing is, if you come up with the name, go online and see if anyone has done it. I found out that like 5 people took my short story, you know, and I go online and look and see if you want that title. So
yeah, good advice.
It's a problem. It is a problem.
Can be. Okay, the last question is super hard, I think. How do you contend with the hubris of thinking anyone should have any interest in what you have to say about anything? Why should the reader take those hours out of their lives to spend it with your book? Tough one. Ray, do you have an answer for that one?
Well, I'm a poet, so I don't expect them to. Poetry, you know, we don't sell a lot of books unless you're, you know, a handful of poets. And so, you know, I don't necessarily anticipate suddenly becoming relevant as a result of my full-length collection. I think another real tonic and anecdote to filling hubris is actually being a professor and teaching a lot and realizing that some things are going to resonate and really excite students and people, and some things are just not. And you know, it's really gonna vary. And so I think, you know, there's something out there for everyone. And you know, I don't think that everyone has to read my book. I hope that a few people will, besides my mom, you know, but I think it's a different question maybe for the novelists, right, who are hoping, you know, that they sell more than 100 copies of their book. You know, if poets sell 100 copies of their book, we're doing pretty well. So poetry doesn't make money. But.
Well, I think all the genres are becoming like poetry.
Well, yeah, there is that. But, you know, I also think, you know, like most poets aren't expecting maybe that someone will buy the rights to their book so that it can be made into a movie or a television show. And, you know, I would love to see someone, you know, perform some of my Virgin Mary poems, but I think they'll just have to like stick with the honor of once having had like a musician from Portugal ask if they could use one of my poems in a musical piece, right? I thought that was pretty cool, right?
Some of you may have heard me tell the story of my poet friend Wynn Cooper, who got a call one day from a person who identified themselves as a singer-songwriter whose agent told her to go buy some poetry, that her lyrics were awful and she needed to go buy some poetry books and read them. And so she read my friend's poem. I think his poetry book was published in an edition of 200. She found it somewhere. And she said, "Can I make a recording of your poem?" And he said, "Sure, just send me the paperwork." And it was Sheryl Crow. And the song was, "All I want to do is have some fun." And my poet friend retired after that from his job at the university. So it could happen.
Wow.
You have never told me that story, David.
I have also never heard that story.
Yes.
I tell it. I'm conscious of. I should have told
well,
it.
Now I'm gonna, nurture a secret little nugget of ego, hoping that.
Yeah, it's a good story. It changed his life, and he still collects money every year from it.
That's amazing.
It's crazy.
I love that.
Yeah. How about you, Kerry? Let's go to a fiction writer.
Well, hubris, man, I don't have any, because I feel so humbled that I'm writing this thing. I think that I'm an anthropologist, and I've discovered everyone has an interesting story in them. I mean, to me, people are interesting. What's tough is, well, how do you tell your story? And I mean, I'm an anthropologist. I grew up in Montana. Maybe that gives, but in trying to write this story, I told this on another interview. I was taking a shower and I was grappling with this story, and I heard this voice. And this is bizarre because I'm not this kind of guy. And it was this old woman who said, "Want to talk to me?" And I opened the shower curtain, and she said, "You don't know what you're writing about. You don't know anything." And it was Alice. And so I went down, took everything I wrote and threw it away, and said, "Well, tell me who you are." I mean, I had this muse, and I can't explain it, except I really got somehow inside a person's head and did this. So to me, it's her. I didn't write this thing. I don't know how to else explain it, that I'm not. I mean, I'm sure I have a lot of pride in it. Yeah, it would be difficult if someone took tore it apart. But
I think the beginning of your answer, though, is rings a bell with me. The process is humbling. The process of doing it is humbling.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, I've read 200 books and essays and 200. I mean, so much research, and then if there's a blank piece of paper and you got to put it down, without Tony LaPopolo helping me, who worked with a lot of writers, I couldn't have done this. So I mean, I have a lot of people helping me, and I have confidence, in her. That it's a good book, it's ready to go. But it's a good question. I never thought about it, but I guess there is a little hubris involved.
Sure. How about you, Sharon?
Well, I kind of feel the same way in that I actually suffer from terrible imposter syndrome. I am convinced nobody wants to read my book. I am terrified that nobody is going to buy it, that people will look at it and just brush it aside because it's, some musty old scholar wrote this about Beowulf, right? So actually that's something I've really struggled with is why should I write this book if I'm not convinced anybody will ever read it? But I thought, this is a book I want to read, so it's a book I should write. And so I did. It was in my head for like 12, 15 years before I got it out. And I actually joined our MFA program so that I would be forced to write it, because I was afraid I would never write it, or I would never know how to write it. I felt I needed to learn more before I could write it. And I did. I absolutely did need to learn more before I could write it. That program was the best thing I ever did for myself. Because I finally got enough confidence to write it. And the other thing that I think sort of offsets the pride and the hubris notion is keeping myself really open for criticism, really accepting it, really understanding where that criticism is coming from. That's something our workshops really helped me deal with and learn how to do. So if criticism does come, and it will, of course it will, I'll be able to not just be defensive about it or overly internalize it and torture myself with it, but use it to become a better writer for the next book. And one thing that really did kind of give me a shot in the arm, confidence-wise, was a couple months ago, I got my copy edits from my editor, from the publisher in London. And along with those copy edits, she sent me an email with a little snippet quote from the editor, the copy editor who worked on my manuscript. And she said, you know, I thought you'd want to see this. And the copy editor had said something like, this was such an incredibly stunning novel. It was an honor to work on it. Please tell the author that she has a fan. And I printed that out and I put it up on my computer so I could see it, so I could remind myself that somebody did read my book and somebody really did love it. And so that gave me confidence, but it also helped me realize that it's okay to be proud of something that I created like that.
It's definitely okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Emily.
Yeah, so I kind of try to take Annie Lamott's advice to heart. You know, she said, when you're writing, don't get out in the bad neighborhood of your mind. And my students and I talk about this all the time, and we say to ourselves, okay, here we are, we're in the crack neighborhood. Man, we want to get out and get some drugs. And like the drugs are, I'm no good, and how dare I tell this story, and no one will care, and all these things we tell ourselves, those are our drugs. We're like, you know what, we're just in this big old Cadillac, keep driving, do not get out in that neighborhood. Don't give in to the fear. And I think recognizing that that's all fear-based and that it's tempting to go into that world helps me like try not to. And there are people who don't like what I do, you know, and there are always going to be people who don't get what I do, and that's okay. And I'm trying to sort of come to peace with that and to not let it, you know, lure me out of the car.
Yeah. It's kind of an odd question, the hubris question, because the more obvious question is the other side of the same coin, which is asked more often, is how do you deal with rejection? Because it's rejection that reminds us that we ought not to be very prideful about this, because the percentage of rejection, as we all know, is exponentially greater than our acceptances. So, well, thanks for being good sports and playing that interview game with those questions. And now we'll hear from your work. And so we have about close to a half hour, so 7 or 8 minutes for everyone. Thanks so much. We can start with Sharon.
Okay, I actually timed mine, and mine is just over 5 minutes, so that's what you're going to get.
Perfect.
That's what I thought I had, so that's what I did. But I can preface it with a little bit of context, because this what I'm reading today comes from the middle of the novel, and it's part of a big battle scene that I wrote. And this is one of the scenes that I worked the hardest on in terms of staging. And because I was having a really difficult time staging action and description and battle and a background and foreground and all of this during a battle scene. I'd never written a battle scene before this. So I'm actually kind of pleased with how this one turned out. So the main character is the disabled daughter of a lord, and their keep is being attacked by a hostile army that was made up of exiles. And in early medieval society, exiles were a symbol of fear and alienation and criminality. So that's one of the things that she's dealing with. All right. Bertha quickly realized that a lifetime of stories about great battles could not prepare her for the experience of actually being in one. She ran after Theo, but almost immediately lost him in the maelstrom of men flooding the grounds of the burg. When the shopes sang about the clanging of arms and the shouts of men, of the clatter of iron as warriors made a shield wall, and the rattle of fire-hardened ashwood spears, they neglected to mention the resulting cacophony was so disorienting and that commonplace skills such as walking and navigation would desert her completely. Exiles clad in Aegil's colors clashed with her father's warriors, who streamed from the barracks as they tugged on their mail shirts and stiff leather greaves. Members of the Adricht shouted orders, and shield maidens unleashed their war cries. Older children, not yet grown enough to do battle, gathered up the small ones and herded them toward the farmsteads near the western gate, far from the worst of the fighting. Fritha tried to keep her bearings as she ducked and dodged her way through the mayhem, searching for a glimpse of Theo's fire-colored hair. Her lack of height meant she could not see over the heads of the men, and their bodies obscured her view of the buildings. She stopped in the middle of the clash of arms, dizzy and disoriented. An exile thrust his sword at the back of one of Weostan's warriors, who was engaged in battle with another man. Without stopping to think, Fritha darted forward and swung her poker at the exile's helmet, which made a resonant ringing noise, and the man crumpled to the ground. Fritha crouched down and made herself as small as possible while she moved through the pulsing throng, searching for anything to pinpoint her location. She tucked her damaged hand under her other arm, trying to protect it from the frenzied violence of battle. One of her father's own men, giving chase to an exile fleeing his spear, saw the blue of her dress and the yellow of her hair, and obviously thinking her an exile, kicked her in the ribs as he passed her. Fritha dropped like a stone. Lightning and fire seemed to shoot through her side, and she groaned as every breath tore new definitions of pain through her body. She clutched to her ribs with her good hand. They must be broken, she thought. In her experience, which was extensive, only cracked bones could hurt this much. A man in blue and yellow, a spearhead sticking out from the center of his chest, tripped over her and fell atop her body. She managed to twist her torso at the last minute to avoid the spear protruding from his ribcage, but the impact jarred loose every ache in her body and lancing pain from her ribs, shoulder, and hand. The exile's face, covered in sweat, hovered only inches from hers, and his blood made dark, wet patches in the blue silk of her dress. His mouth twisted into a snarl, but Fritha could not tear her gaze from his eyes. They pleaded with her, full of fear, as if begging for reassurance that death had not at that moment conquered him. But she saw the life leave his body, and he slumped against her, heavy and immovable. It took some doing, but she eventually managed to wriggle out from under his corpse. Gasping, she staggered to her feet. She had to find her father, but there were so many men. At first, the exiles seemed to swarm the burg like ants on honey, their numbers greater than her father's fighters. However, as warriors belonging to the other kings and clan leaders answered the call of the horn and gathered from every corner of the burg, soldiers from Denmark, Norway, Frisia, Skane, the number of blue and yellow clad fighters began to diminish. In their armor, the warriors seemed twice their usual size. Booted feet kicked up dirt and dust that stung Fritha's eyes and made her cough. Thick black smoke rolled over the battlefield like dragon's breath. The exiles must have put the burg's outer buildings to the torch, and Fritha chilled to think of Theo there. Her mind conjured grotesque images of her family trapped inside a burning building, unable to escape. Beneath the acrid stench of flame and fire lay the uglier odors of blood and death, of fear and desperation. The warriors' shouts heaved up to the sky, songs of triumph mingled with the music of suffering. Offerings of carrion to the eager ravens and eagles circling the battle high above. From their hands they let fly fire-hardened spears, and their bows were busy with the business of death. Slaughter fell upon the earth, and Weostan's men stood steadfast against it. They engaged their enemy with courage, dancing face to face with doom and deep wounds. The smell of blood and disemboweled offal made Fritha's stomach churn. She clutched her side and set off again. She saw a warrior in Aegil's colors raise a two-bladed axe and cleave one of her father's warriors in half. The trunk of his body slid, then split. She saw Olaf bring his enormous two-handed sword down on an exile's head, which burst open. Fritha panted in short, shallow breaths, clinging to her poker and hoping and holding it at the ready as she made her way through the carnage. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you, Sharon. What's the publication date?
February 2nd, 2023.
Okay. Very good. Thank you very much.
It's coming.
Why don't we move from death and destruction and blood and offal to birth? Emily, could you read for us?
Yeah, okay. I'll just read 2 poems for you guys. So the way this worked is various women gave me their stories, and I turned them into poems. And they came to me in all kinds of formats. Text messages, one person gave me her journal, lots of different ways. And this is a really special story to me. A former student of mine, I asked her for her story if she and her wife would be okay sharing. And she said, sure. But she wanted me to start the story way before the birth, because she thought her birth story really started at the cryobank. And I kind of really love the start of that story. So this is Samantha's births for Stephanie and Wendy. Birth 1. Samantha, you touched down in a bottle the color of stars at the Spokane cryobank on a silvery day, scales of soft rain coming down. The man handed your cradle to me, and I held you first, the sleek tail that would become your backbone. And your other mama held me, touched the smallest sliver of you. We strapped this swimming, shimmering you, strong and strong, into a car seat for the drive home. Birth 2. You were conceived in quiet on an afternoon of hollow bones, and I dreamed later of a beach full of gull feathers and how I filled my hands with them, trying to find the one feather that would become your face. Birth 3. I drank a sea full of water, floated in a warm bath, your mama by my side, light scaling the windows of the hospital room as you swam and turned and fishtailed through me as I watched your coming in a mirror. With each push, strong and strong, watched your sleek head turning, coming, turning as you swam into light, into a room where your mama held the skin gates open and your nana held the heartbeat machine, pressed to belly between contractions, and everyone listened to the sound of your name chanted over and over, 140 beats a minute, strong and strong, until you were ready. You pulled your soft fins out of the socket of me and let go of that deep ocean, swam into the sound of your heartbeat, into the sound of your mama calling your name, my name, your nana breathing with your mamas, with your midwife easing your dark head into the light. And then your clean fish body slipped up onto my chest, and your mama put her hands on your head, holding as much of you as she could, and you rested on the soft sand dunes of your mothers, strong and strong, our mama talk drying you, our hands opening, finally, your own silver wings. Oh, Samantha's birth. And the other one I'll read you isn't, it's more of a pregnancy story. And this one I like because I think it reminds us, particularly right now, that women know so much about their own bodies and need to have control over their bodies. And many women struggle to get men and healthcare professionals to hear them when they need them to. So this is a story of a woman saving her child's life. Heart lottery. After her first son was born with a heart defect, she insisted on testing in the second pregnancy. Her doctor said no. Her doctor said, better chance of winning the lottery than a second defect. Her doctor said insurance. But she insisted, order the test. I'll pay for it. I'll fly to Seattle. I'll be the foolish one. And so she did, lying on the crinkly vinyl bed in the quiet room, ultrasound machine humming like nervous thoughts over her head, the tech bored and humming too, and then there it was, the winning the lottery second defect. They stared at the little thumping heart opening and closing the wrong way. They would do surgery the day after he was born. If you would have had this baby in Ketchikan, the heart specialist told her, he would have died. Which she had known and hadn't known. She had simply scratched her thumb against her own fearful heart, hoping for the one break she needed. Thank you.
Amazing story, Emily. Thank you so much. Let's go from the birthing suites to the American West, Kerry.
Okay, we have had two women stories. There's a third one by a man. I was raised by a tomboy mother, and I am used to very assertive women. This is chapter 12, and Alice has escaped a bad situation. She's pretty young. She's only about 15, 16, and she's run off with this Lakota man, Lone Wolf, and he forgot to tell her he already had a wife. Settling matters with my co-wife. Winter came to our village, snows deep, the river iced over. I wrapped in buffalo hide, took a walk in the woods. My breath froze on my nose. What to do about my co-wife? I couldn't sleep, feared she'd sneak in my teepee and cut my throat. She put a knife hole in my favorite Wolverine cap when I wasn't around to let me know what she'd do to me if I hung around. I had to figure a way we could co-wife or tell Lone Wolf he had to choose one of us. I got me a plan. Might not be the proper Sioux way for women to settle a difference, but it would be mine. While we gathered firewood outside camp, I watched Medicine Feet woman put wood in her young daughter's arms to take to camp. She wiped snow from her eyelashes, looked angry at me, gathered more wood. Other ladies left with their arms loaded with wood. Medicine Feet woman and me were alone in the woods. I faced off with her, pulled a knife from my belt, tossed the knife at her. She knew what I meant. Do what you want. Wife, I have no fear of you. I signed. She scared me, but this was not the time to let her know. She was a grown woman. A head taller than me, raised tough, like Sioux women. I pulled my skinning knife from under my skirt, ready to use what Chubb taught me about fighting with knives. Medicine Feet woman dropped her firewood, grabbed the knife, and came at me. You're not Lakota, she yelled in my face. You spread your legs for any man like your mother. I could not allow her to talk like that about my ma. Don't talk like that about my mother, you peaty old mare. What you call me? Take that back, whore girl. All right, I take that back, old dog-hide bag. Medicine Feet woman came for me, knife in hand. I dodged and kicked her in the belly, like Chubb taught. Medicine Feet fell face down in the snow, and I grabbed her hair, long and silky. I forgot for a moment what we fought about. I yanked her head and held my skinning knife to her throat. You're a dead woman if you don't open your heart to me, I yelled. Medicine Feet woman went still, my knife at her neck. I let her go, didn't want to hurt her, wanted her to accept me, to let me belong to their family, to fit in someplace on this earth. Medicine Feet woman did something Sioux women should not do except when mourning the dead. She shed tears. She held her hurt belly and cried without making sounds. Near broke my heart. I liked Medicine Feet woman, wished I had all the woman in me that she had in her. I'd studied how she fixed her hair and sat like a proper woman around a fire. I wanted to be like her, become a proper woman that folks respected. You steal our husband's heart, Medicine Feet woman said through tears that ran down her froze cheeks. You can tell the women you beat me up, but don't tell I cried. I helped her to her feet. I won't tell. Medicine Feet stopped her tears. The problem, she said, was not only her jealousy. Women in camp joked her because Lone Wolf brought a Witcoin home. Me. I put an arm around her best I could, given how tall the woman stood. I fight them if they talk like that, I said. And so the co-wives become friends, and the story moves on.
Thanks, Kerry. Okay, Ray, bring us home.
All right, thanks. So my full-length poetry collection is divided into 3 parts. The first part focuses on family and family history and is called False Genealogies. The second part is focused on history, and I have a lot of historical persona poems in that. And the last section focuses on lost loves. And so I'm going to read one poem from each part of that forthcoming book manuscript. And I'll start, as Aristotle would have me do, in the beginning with a poem from part 1. It's called 30th of November. And this poem is after the marvelous poet Joan Cain's Milk Black Carbon. Start with imperatives. Remember how you ran, how you cowered under the table as liquid and solid vibrated, what terrified and destroyed when the earth sought to shed its skin. A friend tells you about cleaning up a shattered jar of caramel sauce in the dark. She wore a headlamp in her modern kitchen, shards in the thick of sweetness. A relic of your Camino cracks while your dog trains herself to shelter under the table, hundreds of aftershocks as practice drills. Boil the water, store a reserve in case. Take comfort that you are not on an overpass as it fissured, or in the pool. In other words, a tsunami in a concrete shell, a baptism of wave after grinding wave. Hold tight between the gathering of debris. The second poem that I'll read is one that I hadn't necessarily planned to read, but Emily's birth story has kind of inspired me to make a quick substitution, in part because recently things have been very frustrating in terms of bodily autonomy and reproductive rights. I just want to put on my historian hat for just a second and make the argument that women have frequently made use of abortifacients in the past and present, and abortions will continue whether they are legal or not. The difference is whether or not they will be safe. So I'm going to take us to 12th century Salerno, and into a poem called Trota Prepares a Fumigation. One neighbor has come to me, swathed in her cloak and veil as blue as the sea. She begs me to provoke bleeding from her stopped womb. I grind madder and marsh mallow, mix them up with egg whites and flour into small cakes. Another neighbor knocks upon my door, for her bleeding has not ceased for 40 days or nights, and no dove has returned carrying a branch in its beak. I instruct her, so worried and weak, to come back with a pair of old shoes. We take their souls and cook them with laurel and pennyroyal to make a fumigation. When it burns off, we collect the ashes and blend them with hot red wine from Salerno's vineyards. This paste we take and wrap in a square of linen. After it has cooled a bit, I insert it into her womb, with as much gentleness as I can muster. I send her home with spikenard and clove. And the last poem that I'll read comes from the final section, and it's an ekphrastic poem in response to a bunch of lace fans and porcelain figurines in the Museo de Artes Decorativas in Havana. And it does use one Spanish word, cigüeña, which means stork, and it's called When I Loved You. When I loved you, I was like Midas, except everything I touched transformed into lace fans covered with birds instead of gold. When I loved you, each fan I held to wave away the hot, still air whistled while it changed into a porcelain cigüeña, clasping a blue flower in its beak. It could not clatter or call to its family. Far away, they nested high on the rooftops of churches. When I loved you, I tried to stop reaching out to clasp pears and pens and papers because fans and porcelain birds cannot keep night from filling its pockets with stars. I learned to crack my teeth on their light so that storks would not emerge from my mouth whenever we kissed. When I loved you, I ate nothing. Still, thousands of objects became lace fans that turned into birds. They nested on utility poles and branches. And that's it.
Well, thanks so much, Ray. And thanks to all of our four readers tonight, Sharon Emmerichs, Kerry Dean Feldman, Emily Wall, and Ray Ball. Bringing a new book into the world is a cause for celebration, and this is part of that celebration, celebrating books in Alaska, Alaska Book Week. Thanks to Alaska Center for the Book for all their behind the scenes work, their wonderful literary citizens, Lila Vaught and Trish Jenkins, particularly tonight, helping us with this event. So everyone get out there and read. Good night. Thanks so much.